The market of despair, the sun hung low in the sky, casting an orange glow over the dusty marketplace. It was a place where people came to buy and sell goods, but today the air was filled with something darker. The market was packed with people, shouting, jostling for position, and trading everything from food to precious stones. But in the middle of all this noise, there was one thing that stood out. The slaves, rows upon rows of alien beings, were lined up on the auction block, their heads bowed in shame. They were treated like nothing more than items for sale. The crowd moved past them, ignoring the quiet eyes filled with fear and sadness. The slaves had no power here. They were sold to the highest bidder with no choice in the matter. It was a cruel game, one that they were forced to play. Each one had their fate decided by strangers who cared only about the price they could fetch. Among them was a girl young, with soft, glowing blue skin and deep, dark eyes that seemed to hide 1,000 untold stories. She was sitting quietly in the corner, her arms wrapped around her knees, trying to make herself as small as possible. Her orange dress was torn at the edges, stained from days of being paraded through the market. Her hair was tangled, and her body ached from the harsh conditions. She had been sold before, more times than she cared to remember. But today, something felt different. She couldn't quite explain it, but there was a strange sense of hope lingering in the air. Maybe it was the way the sun's light hit the dusty ground, or the way the wind carried whispers of something better. Or maybe it was the man standing at the edge of the crowd, looking out of place among the wealthy buyers. The man was tall, with short dark hair and a worn leather coat that made him stand out. He wasn't like the others. While the bidders around him shouted and laughed, this man stood quietly, his gaze fixed on the slaves. He seemed to be looking for something or someone among the crowd. The girl felt a sudden pang of fear. What if he saw her? What if he decided she was worth something? It wasn't that she wanted to be sold, but in this place, the only way to escape was through the highest bid. And she didn't know if she wanted to be chosen again. The auctioneer's voice cut through the air, announcing the next slave. Step forward, he yelled, and a trembling alien woman was led to the front. She had a broken look in her eyes, her spirit crushed by years of being sold. The crowd jeered, and the bidding began. The girl turned her head away, not wanting to see the faces of the buyers who saw her as nothing more than property. But then her eyes met the man's. For a moment, everything around her seemed to fade away. The noise, the heat, the dust, all disappeared. The only thing she could see was his face, calm and focused, as though he wasn't even part of this world. There was something in his eyes, a kind of sadness, mixed with a strange sort of determination. He didn't look at her as an object. He didn't treat her like the others, who saw her as just another sale. There was no judgment in his gaze, no cruelty. For the first time in her life, she felt seen, truly seen. The man stepped forward. His voice was low but clear as he spoke to the auctioneer. "How much for her?" he asked, pointing to the girl. The auctioneer blinked in surprise, momentarily thrown off. He had expected the man to look at one of the other slaves, the stronger, healthier ones. But this one, the girl with the soft blue skin and downcast eyes, was not what most buyers sought. 5,000 credits, the auctioneer said, a slight smirk on his face. He knew that no one would pay that much for her. She wasn't the most valuable of the slaves. But the man didn't flinch. "I'll take her," he said, pulling out his credits. The crowd around them fell silent. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Slaves like her were not meant to be bought by someone like him. The auctioneer hesitated, then gave a nod. "Sold," he said, his voice almost begrudgingly. The man's bid had been accepted, and the girl was led to him, her hands still bound. As she walked toward him, her heart raced. She had been sold again, but this time it felt different. She wasn't sure if it was fear or something else that made her stomach churn, but for the first time she wondered if there was a chance, just maybe, that her life would be different. Maybe this human saw something in her that others never had, or maybe he would be just like the others, a buyer who would grow bored and toss her aside when he was done. But no matter what came next, she knew this was the start of something new. The man turned to her and offered a gentle smile. "You're free now," he said softly. She didn't know what to think. Could it be true? Could she trust him? The crowd began to disperse, and the man led her away, his hand on her shoulder, guiding her through the chaos of the market. She couldn't help but glance back at the others, all still waiting for their turn to be sold. Would they ever know the freedom she was about to experience? But for now, all she could do was walk beside the man, unsure of what the future held. But for the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of hope. The wind howled as the man and the girl walked through the bustling streets, away from the market. The noises of the marketplace faded behind them, replaced by the sound of their footsteps on the dusty road. The girl's mind raced, with thoughts, and 1,000 questions filled her head. What had just happened? How could a stranger like him have seen her worth when everyone else had only seen a slave? Her heart still beat fast, and the weight of her new life hung heavy on her shoulders. She glanced up at the man, trying to understand what he was thinking. His face was calm, yet there was something about him that gave her a sense of quiet strength. He didn't speak, but his presence felt reassuring. Was this kindness real, or was he only interested in her for some other reason? The girl had been sold many times before, but never like this. She had always been a tool, a commodity for others. To use, no one had ever treated her with the respect that this man seemed to show her. She had learned to keep her distance, to never get too attached, because attachment only led to pain. They reached a small house at the edge of the town, simple but neat. It was nothing like the grand homes of the wealthy buyers who usually took slaves. There were no signs of opulence, just a modest building with a small garden. The girl paused at the door, feeling a mix of hesitation and curiosity. Could this be her new home? Was she truly free here? The man opened the door and gestured for her to enter. "It's not much, but it's yours now," he said softly. The girl stood still for a moment, unsure of what to do. Her heart wanted to trust him, but her mind was filled with doubts. She had lived in cages and chains for so long that the idea of freedom seemed strange. Would this be another cage? Would this man leave her one day, like the others had, once she no longer served his purpose? Seeing her uncertainty, the man spoke again. "You don't have to stay if you don't want to. If you'd rather leave, you can." The girl looked up at him, searching his eyes for any sign of trickery. But all she saw was honesty, and something in her heart stirred. She was used to people keeping their distance, using her for their gain. But this man was offering her something she never had before, a choice. Her mind raced as she considered the options. She could leave now, run back to the streets, or find a way to return to the market. But that path would only lead to more suffering, more pain. She could go back to the life she had known, or she could take a chance on something unknown, something better. I don't know if I can trust you, she admitted softly, her voice trembling. I've been hurt before. I've been used. The man nodded, his expression softening. I understand. You don't have to trust me right away. Just know that I won't force you to do anything you don't want to do. You're free here. You can leave any time. His words lingered in the air, heavy with meaning. For the first time, the girl felt a spark of hope. It wasn't much, but it was a start. She had always been told what to do, where to go, and who to be, but now she had a choice. A real choice. The girl took a deep breath and stepped inside. I'll stay, she whispered, more to herself than to him. The man smiled gently, and for the first time since her capture, the girl felt something stir within her, a glimmer of warmth, a feeling she hadn't felt in so long. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something close to it. She was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for her to be more than just a slave. The door closed behind them, and the girl felt the weight of the world lift off her shoulders. If only for a moment. She was safe, for now, but deep down, she knew this was just the beginning. There were still many challenges ahead. She didn't know what would come next, but for the first time in her life, she was no longer a prisoner of fate, and maybe, just maybe, she had finally found someone who saw her as more than a slave. A new life begins. The days following the girl's decision to stay were quiet, but full of change. She awoke each morning to the sound of birds singing outside the window, something she hadn't heard in years. The house was small, but it felt different from any place she had ever been before. It smelled of fresh bread, of new beginnings. The air felt cleaner, lighter. She almost forgot what it was like to feel safe. Almost. The man, Cale, was kind. Every morning, he would bring her breakfast, simple foods, but fresh and warm. He never asked for anything in return, never expected her to serve him. He treated her like a person, like someone who mattered. And for the first time, she wondered if she really did. Cale showed her around the house the day after she arrived. It was a modest home, with a small kitchen, a sitting area, and a cozy bedroom with a bed that looked soft and inviting. She hadn't slept in a real bed for years. The night she lay down in it, she felt an unfamiliar comfort wash over her, a feeling she hadn't known existed. Do you want to help me with the garden? Cale asked one morning, smiling at her as he worked in the small patch of land behind. The house? I can't say I'm very good at it, but it's something I like to do. She hesitated. She had never done much work like that before. She had been raised to serve, not to create. But something about the way Cale spoke, the warmth in his eyes, made her want to try. I'll help, she said quietly, stepping toward him for the first time. She felt the cool earth between her fingers, felt the life in the plants as they grew. It was a slow process, but it gave her something to focus on, something to be proud of. As days turned into weeks, she began to notice changes in herself. The constant fear that had once been a part of her daily life started to fade. There were moments now when she allowed herself to smile, moments when she felt something close to happiness. Yet despite all of this, a lingering doubt remained in her mind. Was this really freedom? Could it be real, or was it just another form of captivity, one that was slower and more subtle? One afternoon, as the sun began to set, the girl and Cale sat together outside, enjoying the peaceful silence. She found herself asking the question she had been avoiding. Why did you buy me? Her voice was soft, almost hesitant. I was just another slave. No one else cared. Cale didn't look at her right away. He stared out at the horizon, his eyes thoughtful. Then, slowly, he turned to her, his face serious but kind. "I saw you," he said simply. "Not as a slave, but as someone who deserved better. I don't expect you to trust me fully, not yet. But I promise you, I don't see you as an object. I see you as a person." The girl stared at him, searching his face for any hint of deception. But there was nothing. He wasn't lying. She could feel it in the way he spoke, in the way he treated her. A weight lifted from her chest. It wasn't the whole weight, there was still a lot to process, still a long road ahead. But it was a start. For the first time in years, she felt like she was more than just a tool. She wasn't just a body to be sold and traded. She was a person with the power to make choices, to change her own fate. As Cale stood up and stretched, he looked down at her with a small smile. "I'm glad you stayed," he said. She nodded, feeling a strange warmth spread through her chest. "I'm glad, too." That night, as the stars twinkled in the sky above, the girl lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in her life, she didn't feel completely lost. There was hope now, and with it, the possibility of a future she had never dared to imagine. For the first time, she felt like she was in control of her own destiny. Trusting the unknown, days turned into weeks, and with each passing day, the girl found herself adapting to her new life in ways she never thought possible. Cale's kindness, though unfamiliar at first, had become a constant in her life. He had a way of making everything seem manageable, even the tasks that once felt impossible. She had never known anyone like him, someone who didn't ask for anything in return, someone who simply gave without expectation. Still, doubts lingered. Though the life she led now was far better than the one she had left behind, there was a part of her that couldn't fully embrace it. The walls she had built. Over the years, those walls that kept her safe from betrayal and pain remained up. They were hard to tear down, even with the gentleness Cale showed her. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, watching the stars begin to twinkle above, Cale turned to her, his face thoughtful. "Do you ever wonder what your life might have been like if you had never been sold?" he asked, his voice soft. The girl didn't answer right away. The question had caught her off guard. It was a question she hadn't dared to ask herself. What might her life have been like if she hadn't been taken, if she hadn't been sold, again and again, like an object to be discarded when no longer needed? "I don't know," she said slowly. "I never had a choice. I didn't get to decide what happened to me." Cale nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I know, but now you do. You have the power to make your own choices. You don't have to live in fear anymore." The words hit her like a wave. She had never truly understood what it meant to have choices, to live without fear of what tomorrow might bring. Every decision in her life had been made for her, every move calculated by someone else. But now, here she was, in a place where she could decide her own path. She glanced up at Cale, and for the first time, she saw him not just as her rescuer, but as someone who truly cared for her. He had given her a chance to be something, more than the person she had been taught to be. He had given her freedom, and that was something she couldn't ignore. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm scared that if I trust you completely, I'll lose myself again. I'm scared of being vulnerable." Cale's expression softened, and he reached out, gently taking her hand in his. "You don't have to be scared of me. I'll never hurt you. I won't betray you. But trust doesn't happen all at once. It takes time, and that's okay." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The night air was cool, and the sounds of the world outside seemed distant. The girl took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her past and her fears, and for the first time, she let it go. She didn't know what the future would hold, but maybe it was time to stop looking over her shoulder. Maybe it was time to trust again. "I'll try," she said, her voice firming with determination. "I'll try to trust you." Cale smiled. A gentle, reassuring smile that made something warm stir inside her chest. "That's all I ask." The next few days felt different. The girl still had moments of doubt, moments where her past seemed to crawl up behind her, whispering that she wasn't truly free. But there were fewer of those moments now. Every time they worked together in the garden, or when Cale shared a meal with her, or even when they simply sat together in silence, she felt a little more at ease. She was learning to trust, little by little, but trust was a delicate thing. And in the quiet of her thoughts, she couldn't help but wonder, was this all really as it seemed? Could someone really be this kind without expecting anything in return? She didn't know, but she was starting to believe that perhaps, for the first time in her life, she wasn't just a slave. She was a person, someone with a future, someone who had the right to decide what happened next, one evening. As the sun set and painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, Cale turned to her once more. His eyes were full of something she couldn't quite place. "I've been thinking," he said quietly, "about what comes next. I don't want you to feel like you owe me anything. You don't, but if you want, you could stay here with me for as long as you want. There's no rush." The girl blinked in surprise. It was an offer, but it wasn't one that came with strings attached. It was a choice. She hesitated, her thoughts swirling. "I don't know what I want yet." "That's okay," Cale said, his voice full of understanding. "You don't have to have all the answers now. Just know that whatever you choose, you're free." For the first time, she realized that he wasn't asking her to decide anything for him. He wasn't asking her to stay because he needed her to. He was asking her to stay because he believed in her ability to make her own choices. And in that moment, she knew that trusting him was the first step. The future was uncertain, but she wasn't alone anymore. She had someone who cared, someone who believed in her, and that made all the difference. The past comes back. The days that followed were filled with quiet moments of learning and healing. The girl had begun to adjust to life in the small home with Cale, and for the first time in a long while, she found herself smiling more. She spent her mornings helping him with the garden, her afternoons reading books he had given her, and her evenings enjoying simple meals that he prepared with care. There was no rush, no pressure. It felt like she could breathe again, like she could take her time to figure out who she was and what she wanted. But just as she was starting to feel settled, the past, the life she had tried to leave behind, came. Knocking at her door, it started with a soft knock on the wooden door. At first, the girl thought it was just the wind, but then the knock came again, louder this time. Her heart skipped a beat, a sudden chill running down her spine. She froze, instinctively pulling back from the door, a wave of panic surging through her. Cale, who had been sitting by the window, glanced toward the door. He stood up quickly, sensing her sudden unease. "Stay here," he said gently, his tone calm but serious. He walked over to the door and opened it. The girl, her breath caught in her throat, peered from her place in the corner of the room, too nervous to approach. Standing in the doorway was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in dark clothing, His face was familiar. She had seen him many times before on the auction block, bidding on slaves, judging them as if they were nothing more than cattle. He was one of the men who had helped manage the sales, the one who had always looked at her with cold, calculating eyes. Her pulse quickened. It couldn't be him, could it? What was he doing here? The man's eyes flickered over Cale, then narrowed when they fell on the girl, who was still standing quietly in the shadows of the room. His eyes hardened, and a dark smirk appeared on his face. "You're the one who bought her?" he asked Cale, his voice rough and unwelcoming. Cale didn't flinch. "Yes, I am," he replied, his voice steady. "What do you want?" The man's gaze shifted back to the girl. "I see, she's the one they were talking about. The one who was too much trouble for the market." He laughed bitterly, but there was no humor in it. "I'm not surprised. You've got yourself a broken thing, my friend." The girl's heart sank. She knew the words he spoke, those words that had been whispered behind her back for so long. Words that made her feel like nothing. Trouble, broken, worthless. She had heard them too many times before. But hearing them now, from someone who had no right to speak about her like that, cut deeper than anything before. Cale's jaw tightened, and his eyes hardened. "She is not broken. She's free," he said firmly. "And if you've come here to take her back, you're going to have to go through me." The man's eyes flickered with a mix of surprise and anger. "You don't know what you're getting yourself into," he warned, his voice lowering dangerously. "She doesn't belong here. She doesn't belong with you. She's property, just like all the others." The girl stepped forward, the anger and shame rising in her chest. She could feel the weight of his words like chains trying to wrap around her once again. But this time, she wouldn't let them. She wouldn't let him dictate her worth. Not anymore. She lifted her chin and looked him straight in the eyes. "I'm not property," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I'm a person, and you don't get to decide that anymore." For a moment, there was silence. The man stared at her, clearly surprised by her words. But the surprise quickly faded, replaced by something darker, something that made her stomach twist in fear. He took a step closer, his presence towering over her. But Cale moved in front of her, his posture protective. "Leave now," Cale said, his voice cold and unwavering. "You have no power here." The man sneered, his eyes flashing with malice. "I don't need power here," he said, his tone low and threatening. "I have friends in places you can't imagine. You think you're safe. You think she's safe. We'll see how long that lasts." With that, the man turned and left, his footsteps echoing in the quiet room. The tension lingered in the air long after he was gone. The girl stood still, her heart racing in her chest. She had never faced someone so cold, so full of hatred. But in that moment, she also realized something important. She was no longer the scared, helpless girl she had been when she was sold. She had Cale now, and she wasn't alone. She was free, and no one could take that from her. Cale turned to her, his expression softening. "Are you okay?" The girl nodded slowly, though her hands trembled. "I'm not sure, but I think I will be." Cale stepped closer, his voice gentle. "You're safe here. I won't let anyone hurt you." She looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. She had come so far from the girl who had been sold at the market, the girl who had felt like she didn't matter. Now, she was standing tall, ready to face whatever came next. And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel alone. The past had come back to haunt her, but it wasn't enough to pull her back into the darkness. She was stronger now, and no matter what happened, she wouldn't let anyone take away her chance at a new life. The wind had shifted by the time the man left, the tension in the air still thick with the threat he carried. The girl could feel her heart racing, and though Cale's calm presence grounded her, the past still lingered like a shadow at the edges of her thoughts. She knew that this wouldn't be the last time someone from her past came looking for her. She had escaped once, but escaping forever seemed impossible. Cale could sense the change in her the moment the man left. The fight for her freedom had never been easy, and it wasn't going to get easier now. But he had promised her safety, and he wouldn't break that promise. He wouldn't let her go. For the next few days, the girl kept to herself more than usual, her thoughts heavy. She worked in the garden, but her mind was elsewhere, replaying the man's words over and over in her head. She doesn't belong here. She's property. His words cut deep, dredging up all the feelings she had worked so hard to bury. She had been nothing more than a possession her entire life. Could she really be free? Could someone truly see her as a person? Cale noticed the change in her. He saw the way her eyes grew distant, the way she seemed lost in her own thoughts. He knew she was struggling with the reality of what had happened, what she had left behind. It wasn't easy to shake off the chains of the past, even when they were no longer physically there. One evening, as the sun began to set, casting the world in a soft golden light, Cale decided it was time to address the unspoken tension between them. He found the girl sitting on the porch, her gaze lost in the horizon, as if she was searching for something just out of reach. "I know you're struggling," Cale said gently, sitting beside her. "The past is a hard thing to let go of, but you don't have to carry it alone." The girl looked at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "But what if it's too late to escape it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if the past always follows me, no matter how far I run?" Cale's expression softened, his hand resting on hers in a gesture of reassurance. "It doesn't have to follow you forever," he said. "You have the power to decide how much of it you carry with you. It's not about forgetting, it's about choosing what parts of your past you let define you." The girl looked down at their hands, her fingers trembling slightly. "But how can I choose? How do I know what's worth holding on to?" Cale paused for a moment, his words carefully chosen. You choose by living in the present. You choose by making your own decisions, by creating the life you want for yourself. It's not easy, but you don't have to be ruled by your past anymore. You're not a slave anymore. You're free. You have the right to choose. His words hung in the air, filling the silence between them. She knew he was right. For the first time in her life, she had the freedom to make choices for herself. She had the power to choose who she became, not based on what others had decided for her, but on what she believed she could be. "But what if I make the wrong choice?" she asked, her voice trembling with uncertainty. "Then you learn from it," Cale said softly, squeezing her hand gently. "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be true to yourself. That's all anyone can do." For a long while, neither of them spoke. The world around them seemed to slow down, the weight of their conversation settling in the quiet space between them. The girl looked at Cale, truly seeing him for the first time, not just as the man who had saved her, but as someone who believed in her, someone who saw her for who she truly was. "I don't know if I'm ready," she said, her voice filled with quiet fear. Cale nodded, his eyes understanding. "And that's okay. You don't have to decide everything right now, but you do have the freedom to decide whenever you're ready." The girl took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her past and the uncertainty of her future. But for the first time, she didn't feel like a slave to either. She felt the possibility of something different, something better. She didn't have all the answers, but she was starting to believe that she didn't need them. Not yet. "I'll try," she said finally, her voice steady. "I'll try to choose for myself." Cale smiled, his eyes warm with pride. "That's all I can ask." In that moment, the girl realized something powerful. Freedom wasn't just about escaping her past. It was about choosing to live, to move forward, and to build a future that was entirely her own. It wasn't going to be easy, and there would be challenges ahead, but she wasn't alone anymore. She had Cale, and she had herself, and that, for now, was enough. Freedom or chains. The following days were quiet, but the air felt charged with unspoken emotions. The girl's decision to try, to choose, weighed heavily on her, but there was something freeing about it too. It was as if a new chapter had opened before her one, that she could write for herself, without anyone else's influence. Yet, even as she walked this new path, the shadows of her past followed closely behind. The memories of the market, of the years spent as nothing more than a piece of property, still clung to her. Every so often, the faces of the men who had bought and sold her flashed before her eyes. And the man who had come to the house, the one who had reminded her of her worthlessness, was never far from her thoughts. She spent more time in the garden, tending to the flowers and plants, finding comfort in the quiet of the earth. It was hard work, but it was hers to do. It was something she could control, and in the evenings, when the sun dipped below the horizon, Cale would join her outside. They would sit together in the cool evening air, and he would talk to her about his life, about the world beyond this small house, and about what freedom really meant. One evening, after a long day of work, Cale spoke more seriously than usual. They were sitting by the porch, watching the stars twinkle above them. The night was calm, but there was a tension in the air, a sense that something was about to shift. "You've come a long way," Cale said, his voice thoughtful. "When I first found you, you were a completely different person. You were scared, lost in the world. Now you're starting to find yourself again. You're starting to see that you have a choice, that you're free." The girl nodded, her fingers tracing the edge of the table between them. She could feel the weight of his words, the truth in them. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," she admitted, "about making my own choices. But what if I choose the wrong thing? What if I don't know what I really want?" Cale looked at her, his expression kind but firm. No one knows what they want all the time. Life is full of choices, and some are harder than others. But the important thing is that you have the right to choose. You get to decide who you are. That's something most people never get. The girl's heart tightened at his words. She was so used to having her fate decided for her, so used to being controlled by others. But Cale was right. She was starting to understand that she wasn't bound by anyone anymore. She had the power to define her future. "What if I can't handle it?" she whispered. "What if I make the wrong choice and it all falls apart?" Cale's gaze softened, and he placed his hand over hers, gently. "You don't have to do this alone. You have me. You have this place, and you have yourself. Trust in that." The girl looked up at him, searching his eyes for any sign of doubt. But there was none. He meant every word. And for the first time, she believed him. She believed in herself. The next morning, Cale left early for town to gather supplies. The girl stayed behind, working in the garden as she had for days. But today was different. Today, she was determined to take the next step, to move forward, to stop letting the past control her. She found herself standing in front of the door, her hand on the handle. She knew that Cale would be back soon, but this time she wasn't waiting for him. She wasn't waiting for anyone to tell her what to do. She was taking the first step in choosing her future, in living the life she had always wanted, even if she didn't have all the answers yet. The door opened slowly, and she stepped outside, breathing in the fresh morning air. The world felt different today. There was a sense of possibility, of new beginnings. And even though fear still lingered in her chest, she knew she was ready to face it, ready to claim her freedom. As she walked down the path toward the small town, her heart raced with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. She was walking into the unknown, but this time she wasn't running from her past. She was walking toward her future. She didn't know what awaited her, but she knew that she would face it on her own terms. When Cale returned later that day, he found the house empty, but there was no worry in his heart. He had seen this coming. The girl was ready to take the final step into her freedom. He had given her the choice, and now it was hers to make. He smiled to himself, proud of her, and though the girl was out there, stepping into the unknown, she was not alone. She was finally free, and that was enough.